Hello, I'm Jerry Lewis and I'm chairman of the Dunkirk Little Ships Restoration Trust. I'd like to tell you the story of the remarkable Dunkirk Little Ship Challenge. She's a steam tug built during the Great Depression of 1931. She was based at Gravesend in the Thames estuary, but her work meant that she steamed as far as Scotland, Belgium, France, and most ports on the south coast of England. At the end of May 1940, Challenge, along with an armada of little ships, played her part in Operation Dynamo to rescue troops cut off around Dunkirk by the German army. This resulted in 338,000 British and Allied troops being brought off the mole and the beaches as against the original Admiralty estimate of only 45,000. This ensured that Britain could continue to fight and eventually win the war. As Churchill said, a miracle of deliverance. In 1942, she helped to tow the massive Maunsell anti-aircraft forts into the Thames estuary. She was then equipped with a flying bridge and an Oerlikon cannon similar to the one shown. Later jobs included towing parts of the Mulberry Harbour, which ensured the success of the D-Day landings. At the end of the war, she went back to her routine towing jobs and was converted from coal firing to oil. By 1974, she was the last steam tug on the Thames, and she was due to be scrapped. But instead, she was sold to St Catherine Yacht Haven to be a part of their exhibition, and there she spent the next 19 years. Sadly, by 1993, she was about to be scrapped for a second time, but the newly formed Dunkirk Little Ships Restoration Trust intervened, and thanks to Tilbury Dock's generosity, Challenge was moved there and restoration commenced. In 1995, the boiler was fired and she moved under her own steam for the first time in 21 years. But very many problems remained, one of which being that she had not been on a slip for 30 years and major plate work was needed to the hull. Thanks to the Heritage Lottery Fund, Challenge was moved to Husband's Shipyard at Marchwood near Southampton. There, a mountain of other jobs were carried out by a large team of volunteers. In October 2003, she steamed away to start a very busy period of visits. In 2005, she took part in the commemorative cruise to Dunkirk, and then to Southampton and Portsmouth for the Royal Review of the Fleet and the Festival of the Sea. During the various voyages, it became obvious that the boiler, after 75 years, was coming to the end of its working life. The costs of this, together with the associated work, is very significant. But once again, this required funding from the Heritage Lottery Fund. But this would only be granted if we could show that Challenge had a sustainable future. We sourced a British manufacturer who could produce a modern, efficient boiler which met all the environmental requirements and also produced an activity plan to meet the needs of the HLF. In March 2012, the grant of just over £900,000 was approved, leaving the Trust to find £100,000. The work began in Shoreham, with a completion date of May 2013. So that Challenge could attend the opening of the Southampton Maritime Festival. First on the list, the funnel had to be lifted. Then, part of the superstructure cut out. No mean task in itself. This then enabled the boiler, heavily corroded and weighing 40 tonnes, to be removed section by section.
My name is Clive Purser. I'm an ex-marine engineer and I became involved in Challenge to the Future, the project, about 5 years ago.
If that calculation is right, you've got 2 tonne there.
That'll be alright, we can put 8.5 tonnes in here.
We're now in the process of actually cutting out the old boiler and taking it away for scrap.
Big old tank, isn't it? 10, put a 10 at 28 of these. Got it! Yeah.
We will then re-dry dock the tug in order to carry out further underwater work, put the propeller back on, put the rudder back on. The main engine will then be rebuilt by volunteers. The boiler will then be steamed up, the machinery recommissioned. 30. You're never going to get that same quality of steel, no matter how much you try and match it. And what we did, we cut a panel out of the boiler back in the early days and sent it up for metal analysis to try and find out what the steel actually was, but we couldn't get a match.
After a period of 2 months cutting up the 75-year-old marine Scotch boiler, originally coal-fired but later converted to oil, it was all finally removed. Preparations for the new boiler started. Firstly, Challenge was towed the short journey down the harbour to the dry dock for the necessary work to be carried out on the hull. Dry docking has to be carefully organised so as to make sure Challenge stays upright and secure when the water is removed. After a 10-year period since last being slipped, her hull remained remarkably clean. After pressure blasting, sections of the foredeck and hull were replaced where corrosion was evident. The reconditioned stern tube was installed, the hull repainted, and the propeller refitted.
The rescue of over 300,000 of our troops from northern France is one of the great maritime achievements of Britain, in my view. It ranks alongside the Armada and Trafalgar for daring do, for courage, for originality, for inspiration. And it's very important that people remember it, not just now, 70 years after, but in another 100 years. So the restoration of one of those boats that took part, this tug, the Challenge, is a very important part of that memory. The idea of keeping alive the spirit of Dunkirk, of being able to show people round this tug and explain to them exactly the role that it and many other boats played in Dunkirk, I think is a very, very valuable history lesson. But it's also, of course, wonderfully enjoyable to see an old boat coming back to life, new boilers, a lot of work being done on the hull, and to see it back at sea again will be a great achievement, and I hope it goes across to Dunkirk next year.
On completion of this work, it was time for Challenge to return to her berth in very difficult, windy conditions. The new boiler, manufactured by Byworth, one of the UK's leading manufacturers of industrial steam boilers, demanded the expertise and skills to produce a boiler to fit the restricted space and at the same time be arranged in such a manner that the tubes could be replaced through the very narrow passageway between the engine and the boiler room. Once installed, the superstructure and funnel were reunited.
come up on yours, Tom. 4 more.
Meanwhile, in the engine room,
Okay,
the crankshaft, weighing 4 tons, was being carefully repositioned onto its bearings, restored by the Bluebell Railway.
5 more. What was that? Whoa! Everyone stop a minute.
Hang on.
Right, we're just about on the bearing coffee now. Three!
It's true to say that it's an awful lot easier to launch a lifeboat than to recover it.
1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3.
Then time for refreshments, sorely needed on a cold winter's day. Whilst removing the masts, one fell into 3 pieces, necessitating total replacement, and the other required considerable work. The forward accommodation, solely for the master and chief engineer, is being fully restored with its highly polished table, comfortable settees, solid fuel stove, and individual cabins. This contrasts with the stern crew quarters with a bare 7 berths. Final installation of the engine and fine-tuning the boiler, and then it's time to fire up and turn over the engine for the first time. An anxious but rewarding moment.
Actually the pressure, but how much you open the valve, pressure will go up. I think
I think that without you coordinating everything, that it wouldn't have happened. I think there's an awful lot of work gone into it.
Thank you very
Much
much.
of it by you. Anyway, the upshot of it is there's a little plaque, and I've not signed it yet. I've been meaning to for the last few days. But
Isn't that kind of you?
there we are.
Thank you very
That's-
much.
that's
Thank you,
good.
everyone. Thank you. No, I mean, guys, you know, it's everyone's got stuck in and got on with it, you know, and it's, you know, right from, I don't know, when I first started 7 years ago, something like that. And we've gradually built up the people that have been involved, and I think everyone's had a good time and enjoyed themselves and had a bit of fun. And thank you very much. Much appreciated.
After trials, the final touches are added, and then it's time to fire her up.
Do you want steam on the steering gear? Steam is cracked on the whistle, sir.
Oh right, thank you. Is how's this now? Is this all so?
Full on here. Steam is full on.
Right. The right oil's going in the right place.
Engine room, slow ahead.
And here she is, renovations completed on time and on her way to Southampton, joining the historic fleet to open the Southampton Maritime Festival in the presence of His Royal Highness Prince Michael of Kent, the patron of the Dunkirk Little Ships Restoration Trust. Thanks to the volunteers, a monumental task achieved, but an even greater one lies ahead in ensuring that Challenge and the other Dunkirk little ships are maintained and kept alive for the public for the next 75 years. If you're interested in any way in becoming involved, please do not hesitate to contact me.